Hi, I'm Ari Lewis, the host of Mastering the Attention Economy podcast presented by Brand Street. Brand Street is a community of operators building brands through creative, unpaid marketing and media. Each week, I interview founders, operators, and creators to learn how they are earning attention for their brands without paying for it. If you want to learn more about Brand Street, visit brandstreet.co. If you use the code LEWIS, LEWIS, you'll receive 20% off a yearly subscription to the community. This week's guest is Victoria Waters. Victoria is VP of Marketing at Galaxy Fund Management. In this episode, we discuss her father's rise to fame on TikTok, marketing complex products, and brand strategy for crypto companies. I hope you enjoy this episode.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, I didn't want to focus on you for the first question. I actually wanted to focus on your dad for the first question. So, you recently tweeted about your dad becoming a TikTok influencer, and you've been helping him out build that account. Can you just talk about how that happened and what he's TikToking about?
Sure. So I'm basically the daughter of a dadfluencer. My 78-year-old dad has almost 50,000 followers on TikTok, well over 1 million views of his videos. And he's really setting out to be this beacon of advice for Gen Z, all things self-development. And it's under this internet dad persona. And I think he really is jazzed about having TikTok as a platform to reach the younger generations. So we started out on YouTube, but I really found helping him there that it wasn't the reach unless you're really ready to commit full time to being a YouTuber. So of course, decided to test and learn on TikTok and got a bit of the formula down, and he went viral over Christmas break. And he's just so jazzed. He has his first brand deal. He's really reignited his sense of purpose. So I do think it's funny that I am 50 years younger than my dad, but he has many more followers than I do at this point.
So, I still want to focus on this for a few questions, but, what have you learned from the process of TikTok? Like, do you think, this is it? TikTok is really going to be this next major social media platform? Do you think it's a fad? And it's so interesting too, because I use TikTok and have started producing more and more content on it, and I'm really bullish on it. But I think there's this misconception about it being for Gen Z only. Have you found that to be true? Do you see your dad interacting with all types of people? And just in general, like, what are your thoughts on the platform as it pertains to, the future of like marketers and people who are trying to acquire customers?
I'm extremely bullish on the future of TikTok, and contrary to what many people seem to think, I don't think it's just for Gen Z. I think that when you hop on TikTok for the first time as a user and the algorithm doesn't know you yet, you do get a lot of that mass appeal, dancing videos, things that you think, this is not interesting to me at all. But the beauty of TikTok to me is the sophistication of their algorithm, to the point where it's almost scary how quickly they found out my niche interests and things that I didn't even know I would be interested in. They almost predicted for me. So I think you've got to input a few hours as a user, engage with the algorithm, have them get to know you, and then that's where it becomes interesting for you as a user. As a creator, I think it is the best platform for being discovered as a new person. And I think that TikTok was smart to focus on that discoverability and really put creators in front of an audience and kind of have a more meritocracy-oriented algorithm with their batching approach. And it's hard to guess what's behind the algorithm, but you can search that and learn more about that. And I think that's in part what helped my dad become so popular on that platform so quickly. And from a content perspective, I think it's really about capitalizing on the short attention spans. And again, I think that's what brings it back to, oh, this is for Gen Z only. But I think given where we are in our relationship with digital media, attention spans are shorter than ever. And I think that's true across age groups. So in terms of content creation, I think it's really about having that hook within the first 2 seconds. It's about engaging different senses with captions on screen, as well as audio, as well as the soundtrack. So it's just a lot more of a dynamic platform. And I think if you make use of all the features and you hook people with those short attention spans, you can really succeed.
So, the lessons you've learned from operating on TikTok with your father, do you see these lessons? I guess, how are these lessons helping you play out in your actual job of being a marketing person at a large asset management firm? Has this drastically changed how you think about the funnel and acquiring customers? Has it made subtle changes? I guess what have been some of the lessons, and how has that changed your job both strategically and tactically in terms of how you're doing things?
It's a great question, and I never thought I would be discussing how my dad's internet fame has informed my work as a cryptocurrency marketer. This seems like a very odd conversation I wouldn't picture having 5 years ago. But I think what this platform and all new platforms really drives home for me is how quickly media is changing, but there are still the principles that stay the same. So I think identifying your audience's problems, fears, frustrations, and then very quickly being able to illustrate that you have the information, the content, the products to help alleviate those pain points. I think that will stay true forever, no matter what media tools you have at your disposal. So in terms of what TikTok has driven home for me in my actual career is really just the importance of that hook, and the beauty of brevity. And it is hard to condense lots of information, especially in the crypto space, into something short and digestible. But I think that time up front to be as concise and simple as possible is what helps you win in terms of building an audience in the long term.
So, I think that's interesting because you talked about conciseness and really being straightforward in, how you're delivering content. But how do you do that in an industry such as yours? Because, I've been in crypto a while, and I've watched the industry evolve, and I feel like it, to the layperson, and I remember being introduced to like Ethereum, for example, and it was so complex. And when I was introduced to it, they were talking about just concepts like initial coin offerings and tokenization. And obviously ICOs don't really happen anymore, but more tokenization. And I feel like that was a concept that was just so foreign to me, and it was so complex. And for you all at Galaxy, when you're talking about Bitcoin, you're talking about Ethereum, and you're talking about other cryptocurrencies or blockchain, how do you take such complex technical things and help explain that to people? Because it's definitely something that I find was very difficult to do.
You hit the nail on the head there. I think the first thing I noticed when I entered the crypto landscape from the traditional asset management world was a real gap between crypto 101 level education. I think Gemini does the best job there. And then quant heavy analyses. So you get really computer science, like very fast. And I think both of those types of content have an important role in increasing adoption of crypto. What I saw as an opportunity for me at Galaxy Fund Management to capture was that middle ground of, you want to go a bit deeper than, what is a blockchain, but you don't necessarily want to get into all of the technicalities of how it functions. And for me, with my target of financial advisors, I knew that what I was going to be doing was empowering them to have the right conversation with their clients. So you have to communicate to them and help them communicate to their clients clearly. For me, in the crypto space, I think contextualizing it in concepts that they understand and helping to provide analogies that they can use with their clients were the two most important things for me. So I'll take Bitcoin as an example. From an analogy perspective, it's easy to think about Bitcoin as a digital gold, and maybe not everyone agrees with that. And certainly there are nuances that that doesn't capture, but you can think about it like the internet's gold or turbocharged gold. So the way you might think about investing in gold is the way you can think about investing in Bitcoin. And then to make it a little bit more quant based, you can apply some of the same portfolio tools to Bitcoin that you would use in regular asset analyses. So modern portfolio theory is something you can actually apply to Bitcoin, and that's a language that advisors speak. And then that helps them understand, okay, how do I actually size this in the portfolio? How do I understand this with other assets? So it was really about providing the right analogies for client conversations and then rooting it in concepts that they already understood and making it clear that Bitcoin had a space alongside traditional assets in the portfolio.
Yeah, it's funny. I always think of like Uber for X. And I say that because people are so used to, and I don't know what the term exactly is, but like these comparisons, they get things that they understand. So when you talk about modern financial theories or things that apply to a modern financial portfolio, they get that. But then if you talk about like mining in just the context of mining, they won't understand that because it doesn't relate to anything that they're doing in their current role. So it's a good point, and I think that's so powerful, the power of metaphors in marketing and helping people use those metaphors in order to, get to the next level and do that. But, I think that's also another good transition into, can you talk about, we've talked a bit about some of the ways you're marketing this to financial advisors, but how do you guys think about strategy? Like I on your LinkedIn, when I was doing research, you talk about you do owned and paid channels, but like at an even higher level than that, where do you guys go? Okay, this is where our audience lives. Like this is how we're going to target them. How do you think about that strategy?
Sure. So first, in terms of what we're putting out into the world, our content strategy was really education first. So knowing that there was a lot of catch-up advisors especially had to do on this space. And interestingly, this space has really been driven by end clients asking questions of advisors. So we had data on how many advisors were being asked questions about crypto, and then how ill-prepared they felt to answer those questions. So that gap is what I really wanted to address from a content strategy perspective. And in terms of finding them where they are, luckily I had a lot of experience in this from my days at JP Morgan Asset Management, but I wanted to make sure that where I was finding them was a lot more cost efficient, no wastage. In a startup environment, you don't have the budgets that you're working with at JP Morgan. So I took what I saw as the most cost-effective no-fail tactics. And that's what I started with, knowing that, number one, I'm testing and learning into a new category, albeit with the audience I know. But number two, I'm still making the case to my internal stakeholders that investing in paid media is something worthwhile to do. So that was really how I started out, really emphasizing the focus of education first before we're talking about products. And I think that's hard to do when you're starting a new business and you've just launched a Bitcoin fund and you're really eager to get that AUM in the door. With some of your segments, you're playing a longer game. So I think I really focused on first getting our own channels in order. They say, plug your funnel before you start pouring water into it. Although with startup life, it really is building the plane as you go. So a lot of the setting up the owned infrastructure happened at the same time as we were starting to test paid media tactics.
Yeah, and I've heard like a similar metaphor. I don't know where it came from, but it's like test with organic, scale with paid. I don't know if that's I maybe stole it or maybe I came up with it. I don't know. I'm highly doubtful of that, but I heard it somewhere, I feel like. But yeah, so it's interesting. in terms of, you're talking about owned and paid. And I think what is so hard is that education funnel that you're talking about. Because it's so weird, like, especially for folks not in marketing. How do you talk to them? How do you talk to, people you work with, where it's like, well, we don't necessarily want to sell people, because you're talking about sales, but you're not talking about sales, right? It's like we need to explain to them what this is first before we even talk to them about like getting them through the door as a customer. And like if I'm not in marketing, I like maybe don't understand that. Like how do you sell that to folks where it's like we can't just go in for like here's the call to action, like you should go, bring some of your clients' assets over to us to invest in crypto. Like how do you talk to people you work with and explain that concept to them? Because I assume most of the people you work with are already bought in on crypto. They already are like Bitcoin's going to the moon, Ethereum's going to the moon. I feel like some of them don't even understand, well, how do you not get this? So you're like explaining like, well, we have to educate these people first. And it's like, what is there to educate on? They're going to get rich, right? Like, how do you bridge that?
I think that's definitely new to this space because it's still early days. So the people who bought in mentally and literally a few years ago are really have seen the light, and I think are assuming that a lot of the amazing properties of Bitcoin, for example, are so self-explanatory. But I think the number one thing in approaching those conversations, especially with non-marketers, is to have data. So when we're talking about my financial advisor segment, the first thing I did was to quickly acquire data on their perceptions of the asset class, if they even cared, if this was even on their radar, which is the first question. But I think the data so clearly showed that for those who were aware, they weren't necessarily anywhere close to being evaluating products, which is actually, in my mind, a good thing, because I think the brand that can come in and be that trusted partner from day one is the brand that wins that affinity for the long term. So number one, coming with data. And then number two, I would say, again, using analogies. And I use a lot of dating analogies, which might not be the best one, but I would say things like, you're in a bar and you see, a beautiful woman. Are you just going to go up and ask her to marry you? And I figured out that in crypto and in finance, you've got a lot of bold types. Those analogies fell a little flat because you've got a lot of guys who do just go for what they want. So that analogy didn't work, but the data was a lot more helpful. And I think when you come armed with data and you're really attempting to take a holistic look at it and not necessarily have an angle, but you come to a conclusion that's undeniable, I think especially finance quant types can't fight that.
Yeah, that's a great point of sort of overwhelming people with the data and telling stories with data. One thing you didn't talk about, and I would just be curious to explore this a bit, is like the earn side of things. Obviously, it's interesting because crypto itself already gets a lot of like earned media. So do you, try to play in that channel? Do you guys just don't play in it because like you just benefit from the general attention that, the crypto space is getting? How do you all think about that channel?
Certainly right now, and it's just a fortunate time to be in crypto, there are so many tailwinds that we're seeing from news stories about the space in general, about the price momentum, about huge players like Paul Tudor Jones entering the Bitcoin space. From an earned perspective for us, we've really been focused on portraying Galaxy as an institutional quality partner to help bridge the gap between the true crypto world and these big institutions or financial advisors who are starting to look at it at the same time. So I think that we really do benefit from everything that's happening organically in that space. What we do is we focus a lot of our press efforts on big moments, tentpole moments like fund launches. So we had a lot of nice press around our Bitcoin funds launch. I think that that's an interesting story for reporters because it just shows real companies, public companies are taking swings in this space and are further institutionalizing this space. And this is no longer an internet revolution. So I think for us, it's been nice just to be buoyed by everything organically happening. We certainly do approach our fund launches with more of an earned lens. But again, it's nice, I think, with paid and owned, especially owned, where you control the narrative. And I think in crypto, there's a lot of murky narratives that still persist in the press. And you see that on crypto Twitter, a lot of frustration with how, especially Bitcoin, is being portrayed. So I think that's why it's also nice to make sure that the educational content you have on your channels, SEO enabled, hopefully that's what people are finding when they're really ready to dig deeper on the asset.
Yeah, so I guess as a follow-up to that question that I have is I feel like so much of the crypto space is in individuals, right? So, Novogratz, or Mike Novogratz, I'm so used to calling him Novogratz, but Mike Novogratz, who is the CEO of Galaxy, is obviously a big personality, which I won't ask you to comment on, don't worry. And one of the positives probably of that is that he attracts a lot of attention, on Twitter and in the media and stuff. But how do you all think, as a company, is that part of your strategy, is like this, we'll call it employer branding? And maybe it is just, Mr. Novogratz where he's doing that. But do you find others in your company are also like driving sales, driving traffic through their social media? Is that something you encourage at Galaxy? Is that just an accidental thing? How is that thought about?
I think the companies that do that are incredibly smart to do so. And I think one of the best examples that I've seen of that is Lolly. And I know you've had them on this podcast, and they're very active on Twitter. And I think they do a beautiful job of really reinforcing, obviously just amplifying the product, but also reinforcing the mission and what they've set out to do. I think certainly Mike and his Twitter presence is a very strong amplifier for us. And I think it's important that people remember that Mike is an expert macro trader. So he really brings that credibility of the fundamental analysis. He's not, like some crypto celebrities on Twitter who are newer to the game. He's been in finance for decades. And I think it's great that he brings both that credibility, but also the personality that makes people listen. Elsewhere in the firm, we do have some folks doing Medium blog posts or posts on LinkedIn. But I would say that it's definitely something that companies in general can tap more into, is the power of their employees' personal brands and networks. And I think that's where startups in general, I think, are really well positioned against big traditional companies who tend to see personal brand as a liability. And I think that's an outdated thought. And it's probably one that will change pretty soon, even at those larger firms.
Yeah, and I feel like that's especially in the financial sector. Yeah, I had Aubrey on from Lolly, who, she does a good job of, on a personal level, building her personal brand. But, at a lot of these traditional asset management firms or traditional financial services firms, and I know you used to work at JP Morgan, I know that it is not just frowned upon, it's like explicitly said, when you sign up as an employee, there's certain rules you have to follow. And I think that, yeah, it's definitely detrimental because, so many companies, I just, like, the obvious choice in my mind is Morning Brew on Twitter does a really good job of creating this personal branding, employee branding through Twitter. But I think that's something that the financial services and fintech industry could benefit from. So hopefully that's something that changes in the space. But, as we begin to wrap things up, the question I always end on is, you joined Galaxy in October of 2019. What is one, takeaway lesson that you would impart upon the listeners for them to know to maybe apply in their career?
I would say my number one learning has been reporting to non-marketers for the first time, understanding how to clearly communicate what needs to be done, what tactics do what, really bringing it to a non-jargony, non-acronym type of communication has been helpful. And I think I spent my career at JP Morgan working alongside and under super smart marketing minds where you just speak the language together. And I think you take that for granted a bit when you strike out on your own. I was Galaxy's first marketing hire. So I think that you risk losing people if you start, jumping right into concepts that for you are quite basic, but for a non-marketer are something they need a bit more context on. And then I think back to the data measurement point, I think I would have gotten more detailed baseline data to help make the case for the things I needed to do. Ultimately, was able to do that and retroactively pull things together. But as we mentioned, data is really your armor as a marketer, and that's, I think, should be your first priority when you get into a new role, really assessing and quantifying the landscape that you're in. And then finally, on a more personal note, of course, we were just talking about Twitter. I regret not joining Twitter sooner. I only joined 6 months ago. And I, having been at JP Morgan where we weren't allowed to have any kind of public social media accounts, I suppose that was drilled into me. But specifically, the crypto marketing community has been one of the biggest pluses of my online life last year. I've just met so many interesting people in my space. It's a really energizing and positive community. And I'm sourcing hires as I grow my team from Twitter. I mean, it's functionally important to me now. So I recommend anyone listening who's not on Twitter and who can be, get on Twitter and find your people. There are lots of interesting conversations to take part in.
Yeah, and we've met through Twitter as just proof of, the power of Twitter. Wouldn't be interviewing Victoria if it wasn't for Twitter. So thank you, Twitter. But, as we conclude, obviously I'll put your social links in the show notes. But for those who are listening who don't want to look at the show notes, can you just share where people can find you on social media?
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Vic_Waters. That's WATTERS. You can find Galaxy Fund Management on LinkedIn and at galaxyfundmanagement.com. And you can find my dadfluencer on TikTok at your.internet.dad. He would love new followers. It's going to his head already. So let's keep that going.
Got it. Love it. But Victoria, thanks again for joining and for everyone listening. Until next time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider giving us 5 stars on iTunes. If you're listening to us on YouTube, consider hitting the like button and commenting on what you enjoyed. I'd really appreciate it.